I'm really happy to be here today to discuss with you a very hot policy topics today about the taxation of the digital economy. So a few words of context. Maybe on March 23rd, the Commission issued two directive proposals, which both aims at establishing a fair framework for the taxation of the digital economy. It's a comprehensive approach with the creation of a digital significant presence in each national tax rules and an interim solution, which would be an interim tax on certain digital services, which is also known as the famous now Digitax. So these two proposals intervene just after the OECD acknowledged that at an international level, a solution could not be found at best before 2020. And we should read those two proposals of the European Commission in parallels of the reports on CCTB and CCCTB directives, which has been made by Paul Tang and Alain Lamassoure in the European Parliament. And those two maps were proposed to introduce and to take the opportunity of the CCTB and CCCTB reforms to introduce the topics of the taxation of digital economy within the corporate tax framework. So the objectives of this panel will be first to shed light on the main issue at stake when it comes to taxation of digital economies, and to maybe to bring to the fore the different options available to the European legislators, and then potential implication for businesses and for member states. So if our today conference is mainly dedicated to the CCTB project, and so to a comprehensive approach of digital taxation, it is hard not to talk about the elephant in the room, I mean the Digitax. And so let's first jump into this hot topic of the Digitax with our prestigious and our gender balanced, and it's still sufficiently rare to be noticed panel. So first I would like to turn to Mr. Paul Tang, who has been the rapporteur for the CCTB directive at the European Parliament, and who I would like to have your opinion, Mr. Tang, on the assertion of the European Commission, who say to justify its proposal of Digitax for an interim tax on certain digital services, that there was an emergency to act on a legislative level on the taxation of the digital economy, and that, well, a comprehensive approach was only a long-term endeavor. So I would like to ask you, do you share this concern of the Commission on the emergency to act? And maybe in this context, do you think that a specific tax, a tax which would be specific to certain digital services, well, can be an efficient vector?
Okay. Let me say it's absolutely urgent that there is European efforts to modernize the corporate tax system, including taxation of digital platforms. Absolutely urgent. One of the aspects is that taxation should be fair. And what we now see, there are large, mainly American corporates that are highly profitable and at the same time hardly pay any taxes. And that eats at social justice, so to say. So people won't find taxation fair. And these are huge numbers. We did some calculations on our own and could show that Google and Facebook didn't pay 5 billion taxes for the European Union alone. So there's money involved here. At the same time, when you look at the case, it's not just the digital platforms. What is the problem? Because if we look at this, we also looked at the example of Nike, and Nike is you could say a more, is certainly not a digital corporation, but uses the same structure as Facebook and Google to evade taxes. So most of the revenue is this time booked in the Netherlands, even though the revenue is actually made in France and in Germany. So Nike has the same structure. So my message would be, yes, it's absolutely urgent to act from a political and social point of view, but we have to keep their eye on the ball. There's a huger problem than the digital taxation of the tech giants, so to say.
Okay. And how do you feel on this question of maybe, well, is it reachable, this comprehensive solution in, I mean, a short-term perspective? Or do we have to provide for an interim measure?
My political instinct, so to say, is that we would very much benefit from an intermediate step.
Okay.
Because what we need is a more fundamental discussion on a corporate taxation system in an international fora. My understanding is that the US is finally willing to discuss profit allocation and nexus. And I think Europe should take up this discussion because it goes to the heart of the corporate tax system. The principle of source was defined in the 1920s, more than a century ago. And we need a new principle for the corporate taxation. At the same time, we know this is going to be a somewhat longer process. It's establishing a new principle, more based on destination rather than origin. It will take time to develop, but we need to go there. And in the meantime, we have to take an intermediate step. So I'm very much in favor of that intermediate step in whatever form, however ugly it is, because there is a social and political urgency, but it shouldn't step in the way of the final step that you want to take. Mm-hmm. So that's also been my concern. If, for example, a country as France puts its political capital behind the intermediate step but cannot deliver on the final step, then we have a problem, I think. Then we are farther away from home. So we have to do both.
Okay, thank you so much. So what appears clearly, and I think that the example you choose on Nike, it shows also something about digitization of our society and of our economy, that it interrogates the key concept of value creation, which is key for our international tax system and which is central in the way that tax legislation has been designed since the 1920s, sorry, as you said. So I would like to turn to Stéphane Pallez. So Mrs. Pallez, you are heading La Française des Jeux and you have initiated a deep transformation of La Française des Jeux towards digitalization. In this respect, you have necessarily been dealing with the transformation of traditional business models in the digital area. So I would be very interested in getting your views, your insight on the ways value creation has been affected by the digital economy in comparison with what we call the brick and mortar economy, and on its consequences in terms of taxation. I mean, if we agree on the policy objective that we have to tax where the value created, then what does it mean in terms of what we are going to tax, and what does it mean in terms of where we do have to tax? And in this respect, do you think that the proposed and the evoked digitax, well, is doing the job? Thank you.
Well, thank you for your question. As you say, well, I'm managing a company. I'm not a tax expert, although I've been dealing in my career with some tax issues. So what I can bring to this debate probably is the sense of urgency also coming from the business, because. As in fact any company, and I could talk about how lotteries are affected by digital transformation, but in fact all our businesses are in a profound transformation. And all this raises new question about how do we create value, where value is. And clearly, if there's one simple, the most simple answer to that is that value is much more into your customer, into your client, and into the relationship with them, and into the data they generate, and the way you value it, and so on. So it is clearly a very deep and profound transformation that affects us as businesses, of course, as customers too, that we see in every business every day. And yes, I think there is a sense of urgency because obviously our tax systems do not take that into account. I would say in a fair way today, and I think we see it. We read and we see it every day. In our businesses and also, of course, in the medias when we talk about how also can Europe and can European companies be competitive in this world. And to give you a little anecdote, without being too long, the last time I was in Shenzhen visiting Tencent, well, they presented their vision of the world as regards the main company driving for competition in the digital world, and there was no European company. And you know, this is quite shocking. Unfortunately, it is a little bit true. So I think this is something that we should really take into account to say that yes, there is a need to act now and to be, I think, to be aware that this is an urgent matter. I could, of course, take many examples of how value is created today. One famous example is how you, as a customer, in fact, do quote-unquote work for the digital giants when you do a number of things on those platforms. So yes, again, there are many examples of the way that value is moving and the gap between this and our system. So now to your question, which is Digitax a good answer to that? I think it's a good starting point in the sense that it's really a way to say, no, we cannot just continue discussing on the medium-term perfect system that we would all like to get, but will certainly take time if we want to do it seriously. So in that sense, I think it's a good starting point. It is of course it cannot be it can only be a starting point. I think it would be a real issue if we would just stick to the Digitax. So probably the Digitax should be an incentive to move forward on a more comprehensive framework if we believe in this objective, and I think that should be part of it. And now, to be frank, I was also struck by some reactions that I've been seeing about the Digitax. For instance, one CEO of a French platform, which is called Le Bon Coin, a very successful French platform, issued an opinion in the newspaper saying that he's afraid that this would double tax him and kill him and make not much difference in terms of competition with the biggest platform that were mentioned. So clearly, devil is in the details with the Digitax. So I welcome the idea and the principle, because I think, again, there is business and political urgency, but I would advise for a large consultation of the business in the way it is carved, in order not to, in French we say, ne pas nous tirer une balle dans le pied. So I don't know how you say it in English, but probably not have a bullet in your own foot at the end of the. That's not the right translation, but it doesn't matter. I think you understand me, and that's really what I wanted to say on this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Pallez. So this interim tax that we talked about has been often, maybe abusively, presented as an anti-GAFA tax. And what is clear is that it includes, it implies a shift in the taxation logic. I mean, we are shifting from a tax on benefits, on revenues, to a tax on revenues, and a shift from a comprehensive approach, a comprehensive reform of corporate taxation, to a kind of sectoral approach. So I would like to ask you, Maria Volanen, with representing Digital Europe and also digital technology, and also heading the taxation policy working group of the technology industries of Finland Association. How do digital actors receive the call for fairness, the call which has been addressed by Mr. Tang, but which reflects a social demand and a political demand? How do you receive this call for fairness? Is it fair for you? And maybe a question about the digitax more specifically. Does a specific form of taxation for digital services, and again for certain digital services, seem appropriate to you? And do you foresee maybe any difficulty in its implementation? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to have really short answers, or or maybe I should talk a bit more to explain my views?
Yeah.
So thank you. I represent Digital Europe, but like you said, I also represent the tech industries of Finland. And to tell you a bit more about that organization, it's 1,600 companies, all sizes, so like huge global companies and also teeny tiny one-person companies. And it's digital tech companies, but also this sort of really traditional industry companies. So like metal industry and shipping and all sorts of those things. And the thing that I would like to highlight is that even though these are really various kind of industry companies, they are all digitizing. Most of them, they are digital economy companies already. And for example, 70% of Finnish private sector R&D investments are done by technology industry companies. So there is a lot of digitizing there. So it's just like this has been said previously many times, but it's impossible to have this sort of, to say that there is digital economy, because there is no digital economy, there is just economy. So, actually I would like to refer to the previous panel where there was a discussion on is there any evaluation on how would the CCCTB attribution formula affect companies and countries. Well, a couple of our member companies and I have been doing some calculations, and on a company level, the effect might be, or according to the calculations, the effect would be that 30 to 50% of the corporate income tax would be attributed to other countries than Finland. So, yeah, I'm a bit upset. And this is on a company level. Of course, this includes mostly software, gaming companies, and those sort of, in a way, digital companies. And the calculation on a country level are ongoing. So unfortunately, I don't have answers to that. But still, on a company level, it could be even 50%. This being said, that was like a spoiler before, but to this, is this fair and is this appropriate? Referring to these figures, I don't think it's that fair. Yeah.
I find this a bit troublesome, really, because you make your own calculations, no one has seen, and then you conclude it's not fair. Sorry, this doesn't really convince me, to be honest. And I've heard this many times. This, by the way, the weak point in the approach by the Commission. The Commission is well aware there are not good estimates what it means for at the level of the firm and at the level of the member states. I accept that. And that's a point that we need to look at. It's my first thing I said to the Commission, actually. The problem is, of course, that you need the cooperation of tax administrations to get it done, because they have the data to do it, and they don't cooperate. So there you go. Well, that's something that needs to be solved, and needs to be solved soon. Because otherwise, we get these weird kind of stories. It can't be true if you look at the profit apportionment formula. And there's 2/3 is just real assets. So it can't be that you say 50% goes out. That's simply impossible. So I very much doubt your calculations. And let me just say that the digital sector, you can perfectly say that the economy is becoming digital everywhere. That's true. At the same time, it's pretty obvious that we have digital platforms that are now that belong to the giants in the world. So if you look at the top 5 measured by on the stock exchange, they are all digital firms. These are the CAFAs plus Microsoft. And they have really benefit. They have had an unfair tax advantage. It's not the reason why they are valued this high. There are much more. I think that the problem is bigger than this, because they go to a monopoly situation, for example. But they had an unfair advantage. That's pretty obvious. So the only answer is it fair? The answer is yes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Tang.
Thank you.
Maybe before jumping in, because we talked about the apportionment formula, which is more concerning the CCCTB project, I would like to come back to the Digitax. And I would be very interested in getting your view on this project, which would be the short-term solution advanced by the European Commission. Does it make sense for you? I mean, does it respond to this call for fairness that you addressed? Is it an appropriate way to respond to this call for a fairer tax system?
Well, I have to say I totally understand your viewpoint, and like I said, it's on a company level, so I cannot say what it is in country level, but still the figures are accurate. So still, the reason is that these companies are gaming or software companies, and they do not have any tangible assets, or at least they don't have much of it. Finland is a really small country, so the sales by destination, that's really small. So, for example, gaming companies, they are exporting 95% of, so, but still. Coming back to this, is it fair? I would like to address this through the Commission's main goals. And I totally agree that these are important and supportable. Something has to be done. So it has to be updated, the tax system as a whole. I totally agree. And all the companies should pay their fair share, definitely, but not double tax. So I think we can agree on these things, I hope. And I have to say that not all companies have been paying their fair share. So these example companies are from Finland. But still, so something has to be done. The goals are that the Commission has given is fairer taxation, supporting competitiveness and growth, secure member states' tax bases, and prevent tax avoidance, and to have a more effective and efficient taxation and tax certainty. Well, I still have to say that it's, if you have a different set of rules to some companies, but not all, I don't see that as fair taxation, because some companies will be taxed differently. And like I said, it's impossible to say that there would be a digital economy, because it's just economy. Then to the supporting competitiveness and growth. I think, again, if you have a totally different tax system, and talking about Digitax and also CCCTB, I'm not sure if it'll make EU attractive if you introduce a totally different tax system. But I would like to see updates done to the current system, and maybe have a long-term roadmap of what will be done. For example, like CCTB, so that it would be said that, okay, 2 years from now we will have this harmonized, and 2 years from now it'll be this, so that the companies will have time to adjust. And then to the Digitax, revenue does not mean profits, so I see a problem there. So loss-making companies would be also paying taxes, which would affect and be harmful for growth and innovations. Then the third one is secure tax bases and prevent tax avoidance. Definitely an important goal. But again, different tax system, I'm not happy with that. And the message that we have been receiving from the companies is that if they will be taxed here with a 3% revenue tax, that probably would indicate for them or the owners to say that, okay, it's too expensive, you have to move the company to other countries. And this is, of course, the global companies who already have companies in other countries. And that's, I think that would be really, really bad for the EU, because I would love to see that the EU is a functional, really competitive single market. It has all the components, so it could be done. And then, again, more effective, efficient taxation and tax certainty. A different tax system that would be expensive, unpredictable, and cause tax dispute and double taxation. So that is my comments. I know that you probably have a lot to say in opposite, but you asked me, is it fair? And I answered that, yeah, not so much.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Volanen. I understand from what you say that to you, a measure such as Digitax could hurt, but I didn't understand exactly how, growth and innovation. And then I think I will turn to Mr. Eelco van der Eden, who had a quite comprehensive and experience and insights on taxation problems in various economic sectors. And so I would like to take advantage of this experience of yours to ask you, precisely on this question on the potential harm on growth and innovation. Does a measure like Digitax, does it make sense from an economic point of view? Does it make sense? Is it efficient? And what do you think about the proposed 3% rate? Is it a good, I don't know, is it a good figure? Is it a good balance? And maybe an additional point is that, well, given the difficulties to reach an agreement when the rule for adopting a measure at the EU level is unanimity, it appeared that this interim measure, should it be adopted, could be more than just interim, and could be maybe a mid-term or even maybe a long-term solution. And then would it be sustainable, a world in which the European Union taxation of digital would be the Digitax?
How much time do I have for these 26 questions?
5 minutes.
Okay. Let me try to give a comprehensive answer, also based on what was discussed in the panel before. First of all, of course, everyone says nowadays, which is true, that data is the new gold. Gold can be valuated, so in a short time data will be valuated, also raw data. It's just a part of a production process. A point I would like to make, also the questions before, is this anti-avoidance or is this simplification? I would go most certainly for simplification of the international corporate income tax structure. And why? Because the cost of compliance and the cost of collection, let's not forget one of the most important stakeholders in this debate, tax administrations, the cost of compliance for corporate income tax compared to other taxes are outrageous. The last figures I heard, it was 2 years ago, for example, the Netherlands, around a bit less than 8% of the revenue is corporate income tax of the Dutch state, but nearly 80% of the budget of the Dutch tax administration is allocated to collect that. And there are many country examples. And I think for evasion, against tax evasion and avoidance, there are other tools even outside tax law. I also heard a remark by Mr. Bertelsen that the biggest multinationals can handle it and handle all the compliance schemes. Perhaps yes, but the amount of investments they have to make is huge to keep it afloat, multi-territorial reporting standards, which is one of the reasons why some already did and some large multinationals are really looking into outsourcing their tax function entirely to service providers. And we know also, as a fact, that some conglomerates of large businesses are contacting large service providers and tech developing companies to help them to build, let's call it raw data databases in order to help them to improve and outsource the compliance processes. Getting back to the question of sustainability. We must do something, that's true, but why is the system as it is? Because we made it complicated. It is us. And I was, well, representing the body Accountancy Europ. It will not come as a surprise that I very much agreed, of course, with Patrick de Combourg. The closer you stay to the source data that form the basis of your corporate income tax compliance, the easier it gets. So the closer you stick to your local statutory accounts as basis for taxation, the lower the cost of compliance will be, the easier it will be for tax administrations to audit and to collect and enforce compliant behavior. The amount of deviations, we see the deltas between local statutory accounts that then need to be translated in a tax return, and a summary of that is your BEP 13 fact sheet, etc., etc. If that is simplified, I think we will, combined with a valuation model on data and data transactions, we will make a step in the right direction. Especially, I would then say that the CCCTB objectives are, in my view, sound and solid. We must go to simplification. We must go to a model whereby the attribution is more based on economic reality than of the, let's call it, metaphysical fiscal profit ideas that states make. It's just not longer sustainable. It is creating inequality, and the socio-economic cohesion of our economic society is thereby at jeopardy. If people do not understand the system anymore, and they don't, something must happen. So I also very much agreed with Mr. Bertelsen that we should not forget small, medium enterprises to take them into the thinking of this. But in the meanwhile, indeed, we need something like a solution to bring a bit of rest in the debate around big tech.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe on this question, just before jumping in the question of the CCTB, on this question of the impact on growth or in innovation or on SMEs, Mr. Tang, do you have any reflection for the Digitax? Yes, and maybe on the question of we all know that taxation issues are politically very sensitive. And if we achieve the digitax, but that we cannot achieve in the 2 or 3 or 5 years coming a more comprehensive solution, well, what is the signal that Europe sends to the rest of the world, and what could be the consequences of such a sectoral approach of taxation? Would it be acceptable?
I think that's the main concern, of course, that we end up with the temporary solution becoming permanent. Yeah. That's why I said in my first contribution, it's an ugly solution, which you can politically and socially be justified, but still it's ugly. And you're looking for a more permanent solution that, in the effect, modernizes the corporate tax system, and that's why I say keep your eye on the ball. Having said that, the impact of the digitax, well, first of all, it's not entirely fair in the sense it's not a CAFA tax. It's just a tax on Google and Facebook. I don't think it will hurt Apple and Amazon. Will hurt Apple and Amazon that much. So it's half a CAFA tax to start with. So that's a pity in a sense. There you go. So that's why one of the reasons why it's an ugly solution. But I don't think it will do tremendous harm, in at least in the short run, because what we do is taxing profitable firms. So I'm very keen to hear, and maybe I just heard one example of loss-making firms that meet the threshold level of 750 billion turnover. I don't think there are a lot of companies out there. So what is the example that of the company that has to pay the digitax of 3% and it makes a loss? I'm very happy to hear it. Not that many, I would say. So I don't think it's efficient, because these are supernormal profits, what we see in that sector. That's pretty clear, because it not just applies to Google and Facebook. Also, we looked into the case of Booking.com, similar picture. They pay highly profitable, hardly pay taxes. But what we see from the calculation we do, by the way, is that 3% is on the low side. So it should rather be 5% for that matter. That would be closer. That would be closer to a fair taxation if you compare the average burden for brick and mortar companies and for digital companies. But the main political concern is, yes, it's a sectoral tax. You could say it's not. In that sense, it's ugly. You would like to have a comprehensive approach. Will the temporary solution stand in the way for the more permanent and comprehensive approach?
Okay. Thank you. So maybe let's jump in the discussion about the CCTB. And I would like to come back then to Stéphane Pallez and about the comprehensive approach of both the European Commission and of the proposal of the Parliament. And I understand that even on a market which is organized purely on national lines, such as the gambling sectors, you face forms of unfair competition from digital players, purely digital players, partly based on aggressive tax planning. So, in your opinion, can the CCCTB approach provide a lever to attain a sustainable, level playing field at EU and maybe at worldwide level?
So maybe before answering your question, I just wanted to add a little note to the previous debate, because actually there is a famous example of a company that was not profitable while having a turnover over 700, and which is Amazon. In fact, Amazon, I think till 2 years ago. But in my view, it is absolutely. Again, I would not use that as an example not to tax them. I will use that as an example that, in fact, it's pretty appropriate to tax them, because Amazon has been growing in terms of capital market value while not making profit. So, in fact, I would use this example as a good reason to show that the question of profit is not the only criteria to look at business model in today's world, because again, our friends GAFAM, including Amazon and Microsoft, actually the main value they created is not reflected for Amazon, for instance, in profit. Now I think they're making profits because they sell cloud to everybody, but that's another debate. So to come back to your question on the situation in the gambling sector, I think it's quite interesting because the gambling sector, again in two words, is a sector which is regulated on a national level and then taxed on a national level. That's the principle that was accepted by EU and the Court of Justice. So that's the way it is. But although this is absolutely clear and legal, it has not prevented some players to actually develop, one could say, tax planning or tax organization optimization that basically have the consequence that most of the, well, not a lot of tax is paid on a global level anyway, and most of the tax which is paid is actually paid not in the country where the customers are. That's absolutely clear as of today. Of course, those actors are pleading that this is absolutely compatible with the current system. And we don't think it is, but maybe it is. There is at least some ambiguity. So in that sense, and maybe again it's only the gambling sector, but it's a very important sector in terms of revenue for the states. For instance, 22% of our stakes go to the French state into the budget. That's more than 3 billion per year. So it is the equivalent of a big tax. So it's very significant, not only for France, but for a lot of countries. And if this tax base disappears progressively because all the profits would be located in tax in some countries that do have very low corporate tax in Europe, I think that would be a big threat. So in that sense, to come back to your question, a comprehensive system such as CCTB could definitely bring some answer and some progress. Again, we know that it's not going to happen into one night, but it will probably, if we were to apply it to what we see today in the gambling sector, probably it will mean that there would be a different tax distribution among the states, and again, which will be much more adherent to the number of customers, because again, in the online, in the digital economy, which is, I agree, more and more everywhere, and particularly in the gambling sector, it is everywhere now. The value, again, lies very much with the customer base, as we all know it, like in any sector. So in that sense, I think CCCTB, would certainly offer a good prospect to have a fairer, more fair distribution of the tax base around member states. And in that sense, it should be, we should hope that this will not take too much time to come, because to come back also to the point that was made, again, digitax is a kind of ugly solution. Maybe we need an ugly, urgent solution, but we cannot stay with an ugly solution too much time.
Okay, thank you so much. And I would like to come to you, Eelco van der Eden. So maybe to react on what has been said by Ms. Stéphane Pallez, and maybe to have, well, if you would have to compare the digitax with the CCCTB or with the significant digital presence, how would you assess the proposal of the Commission and the proposal of the Parliament? Does it make sense from an economic point of view? And do you see a difference maybe in the in the approach of the Commission, for which CCCTB, if I understand it correctly, is reserved to the biggest businesses, and we have a, let's say, a directive which is applicable in any case, and the approach of the European Parliament, if I understand it correctly, who propose to apply the CCCTB project on a much more wider scope of application. Is there a difference in those two approaches, and one is one preferable to the other or not? Does it not make a difference?
Yeah, well, let me start with responding also to your remarks. 10 years ago, there was one tech company in the top 20 market cap companies in the world. Now it is 9. So it goes tremendously fast. And the issue is that the changing economy, the developments in economy and in the digitization and the globalization of world economy are outpacing the traditional ways on how we make laws by far. By far. And I think that in itself is a bit dangerous, because by the time after a couple of years and discussing it again, that some solution has been found as a response to a certain development in the economy, it is already outdated before it goes to press, digital or paper. Mostly paper with legal people, by the way. Having said that, I think that in order to work to a sustainable environment in the EU, you must design a target operating model where you want to go to with your tax. And I think the CCCTB, including indeed the digital PE elements that was included and were discussed this morning, I think that could be a perfect target operating model to work from in conjunction also with the OECD. That does not mean that I think we should wait to implement a new system only after the OECD did agree. I think we in Europe, we have also a responsibility to the EU itself. The best would of course be to align them. I immediately agree. But if that would not be possible for whatever reason, then certain steps need to be taken. That leaves us with the proposal and basically the broadening of the proposal of Parliament. I would say that fits within a more sustainable target operating model where we want to be in a couple of years, but you have to have that magnetic north where you are sailing to a long-term strategy, otherwise you keep running behind the facts, as we say in Dutch. But then we have this in-between issue, that we have an issue and that there is not a level playing field between the large .coms and the small stores, bookstores here around the corner. That's a fact. So how can you remedy it? We can find many flaws and mistakes and issues in unfairness and operationability and whatever you have on the proposals made. But we need to come up with something. So if this is not good, what has been presented by Paul, then I would challenge people that think it's not good to come with another intermediate solution. Because politically, I think it's not viable to have this discussion for another 5 years without coming with a solution somehow to bridge the gap. And we all know that countries going an Alleingang, as they say so nice in Germany, will be very, very detrimental to indeed growth and cost of compliance.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. van der Heijden. I would like then to go back to Ms. Volanen. And, well, I think we all understood that you were not favorable to the Digitax, but does the digital significant presence would make sense to you? Or if you are well, skeptical about this digital significant presence and the proposal of the European Parliament and of the European Commission, well, I would be tempted to step into Mr. Van der Heijden just said. What would be for you, well, the alternative scenario, the alternative viable solution? Do you have something to propose, or?
Yeah, thank you. I actually, if I can reply to you just briefly, not to get into a fight, but still, I have to point out that the first, the DigiTax, I'm not sure if that is only a part of GAFA companies, or actually, if you could elaborate what is meant by the third business description, because the Commission has said that the third part is sale of data, sale of user data, but then in the directive proposal it says transmission of data. And if it's really transmission of data, then that will include a lot of companies. So if you could just comment on that, and then we have been doing a comparison of Finnish digital companies, and actually the effective tax rates vary between 20 and 33%. So not all digital companies or digital companies, so economy companies, no digital economy. So not all digital companies pay 9%. At least in the Nordics, they pay 20 and more %, so they would be taxed quite heavily. So to your question, in a way, the concept of virtual permanent establishment, I have to say that the principle is understandable. I can agree that in a way that makes sense. So it could be, there is potential there. And also, like I said previously, CCTB with 2 Cs, there is potential. So some sort of harmonization to make taxation easier in the EU area, I think there could be potential. But then, to come to the details of this proposal, there has been, you mentioned already or discussed, is there value or significant value to the customer data? And obviously there is some value. And I have to say that it's good that there is discussion on whether there is value or not. But I have an example of like, does raw data have value on its own, or does it have value when you have done something to it? So if I would send you, for example, like a massive amount of data, like big data amount, of course, saved to floppy disks, because that is exempt. So you can use floppy disks, CD-ROMs, C cassettes. Those are excluded from the second part, so not included in the DigiTax. And I would send those floppy disks, like a huge amount of those, without no algorithm. And then I would say that please give the value that is in the raw data. So it has to include also the IPR, the algorithm, the persons doing something to the data. But of course, I'm not saying that the data wouldn't have any value, and some companies, they really thrive on the data. So there has to be some sort of balance with this. So it just cannot say or be that only the raw data or the data and the participation in all cases have significant value, and to override all the IPR and the R&D and all those things. So there, we have to be careful on like, so that it doesn't sum every company's up. But
But so
Yeah.
at the end of the day, if I understand it correctly, you say you're not opposed by principle to the significant digital presence concept, but we have to work on the definition. Do I understand you correctly?
Yeah, in a way, because this proposal has a lot of problems because the limits are so low, and the description, like the described business is so wide that even the really tiny companies would be affected.
But the idea of the digital significant presence would be, well, to create just a taxable nexus and would not say, well, anything about the amount of the tax which would be paid at the end of the day. So I would say, is it that important that the correct value of data is not reflected correctly in this this concept?
Yeah, it has value because now, because the limits are so low, permanent establishment would be in almost like in really many countries there would be a permanent establishment, and if you say that the value is created by the amount of users, then you say that okay, the bigger the country is, probably, or the amount of the users, then you say that the data from the consumer is more valuable in a way, or has significant value, and then that will lower the value of IPR and so forth. So I have a couple of comments on this. The value, like the value creation.
Okay, maybe in 1 minute, please.
Yeah, okay. So one question, why would EU customer raw data be more valuable than the raw data of customers in US or China? So probably in one point, China would be like, okay, well, we have a lot of customers, we have a lot of raw data, so please, we will have to have the taxable profits. And then there is also the GDPR, so the new data protection legislation, which is coming into force, I think, in May. Yeah, so now, as I see it, if we say that the taxation would be based on where the customer has been based when, like, and that would be the base for the taxation, then that would mean that we have to track exact location data from the individuals so that we can do the taxation. And then, of course, it has to be stored for years. I don't know how many years the taxation is open for tax auditing in Belgium. In Finland, it's 6 years. And so I think there should be discussion, is this sort of taxation system in breach with the GDPR, or at least with the aim of the GDPR, data protection?
Okay, thank you so much. I would like, before opening the floor to the audience, coming back to you, Mr. Tang, and maybe to offer us your views on, well, what Ms. Volanen said on her understanding of the significant digital presence. And maybe a last point on GDPR. Do you see a problem in the articulation of, well, the CCCTB project and the GDPR? And if so, what could be the articulation between those two social preferences, fair taxation, protection of individual of private data? Do you see a problem? And if there is one, how do you see the articulation between these two priorities? And maybe I would like to come back to the question of the apportionment formula that you begin to talk about sooner, because it's clear that, well, the consolidation of the corporate tax base would have an impact on smaller economies towards bigger economies. Some countries will lose some tax base, and some countries will probably gain some tax base. And do you see this issue as a potential showstopper in the negotiation between member states? And if so, how can we ensure, well, maybe a fair and a politically acceptable apportionment of the tax base between the member states?
Yeah, I was a bit puzzled on the questions, because I'm not sure in which proposal we are, the Digitax or is it the CCCTB? Because the CCTB is relatively straightforward, because what you do is you go back to profits as the base for taxation. That's where the value of data comes in, only through if you make profits. So that's relatively straightforward. We're familiar with this concept, that there's no complication then. It could be for the apportionment, because we introduced, the European Parliament also used data in the apportionment. Let's face it, that's work in progress. I don't think it's about necessarily about the raw data itself. And I don't think it should be that privacy has to be a restriction, because it's not that you don't ask for personal data to be stored. No, it's the corporate-wide system data that needs to. So you could say it's the metadata at best. So I don't see the privacy issue, but it's like I said, I'm still careful, because I think it's work in progress. So we can these issues need to be raised and need to be considered, and how we move on. The reason why the CCTB is important, because it's a game changer. It's a real game changer. We shift the principle, and that's necessary in a world of globalization and digitalization. It's the only way to go forward for corporate taxation in the 21st century. Indeed, our system has become so complex. And it has much to do with the abilities, the possibilities for the corporates to shift with the tax base, and for the countries to compete. This is what so it's not that everything is mobile, but financial constructions, digital platforms, intellectual properties, these have become very mobile, and that is what the companies use in their tax planning, and where the countries start to compete. This is what you want to break with. And in that sense, the CCTB is a game changer, and it brings us back to a robust and fair tax system for the 21st century. And it's also important for the European corporation, because what we now see is a form of competition among member states that's also very ugly. So I call my own country, the Netherlands, a tax pirate. We go to another country and steal tax base from it. The surprising part is, if you say that in the Netherlands, no one is really offended. When I said it in Ireland, they are offended. It tells you also something about... So the Dutch are not offended when you call them a pirate. It's okay. It says something about the Dutch history, I suppose. But it's weird that on the one hand, we are European partners trying to work together on security, on the market, on sustainable energy. We try to work as partners, and on the other hand, we are competitors of the worst kind. So for me, CCTB is not just, for me it's very important because it's the game changer. But it also restores the European corporation, like we become partners again, and this is how it should be.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Tang. I propose that we open the floor to the discussion with the audience. I see a first question from Mr. Filippo now. And we'll take 2 or 3 questions. So first question there, then Mr. Lassens. Sorry, Thierry.
It's working, yes. It's Alfred de Lassens from Air Liquide. It's more a remark than a question, but about the level playing field and on digital economy, there is something which changed a lot on January 1st this year, I mean, is that the fact that all the GAFA, all the profits, 100% of the profits of the GAFAMs and all other US companies, by the way, are now taxed in the US at a rate, minimum rate of 10%, growing in a few, I don't know, in 2 or 3 years to 13%, which is basically the Irish tax rate. So all what we have known in the last few years is gone. I mean, you know, the zero tax on profits located in Bermuda, Cayman Island, or whatever, it's finished because they will be taxed. Even if they don't distribute dividends, they are going to be taxed in the US soon at a rate of 13 point something, I don't remember exactly, but a little above 13%, 1.3. So it's not the same as the average corporate tax rate in Europe, which is around 22%, but it's still a big change, and that should be taken probably into account as well, because it's a big change. It's going to be billions of dollars going into the US tax system instead of staying in the pocket of those US companies. And voilà.
Okay, thank you. So,
yes, Thierry Philippona, Institut Friedland. A question for Paul Tang. The proposal from the Commission tabled in March on a comprehensive solution for taxing the digital economy, the one taxing on profits, not the interim one, obviously can relate to CCTB. Is it compatible with CCTB? How do they interact? Should it be integrated into CCTB? Do they live their own lives? Are they in competition? Is it linked to the the fourth criteria in the apportionment rule in CCTB? I'd be interested to hear your view on this.
thank you. I think I saw a third question, there.
Hi, I'm Lou from the European Small Business Alliance. I'm listening to all of you today, and I hear something about this digital tax, that it's ugly, that it's not good enough, and that we don't want it. Then, why, in this mandate, we all talk about better regulation? How can the policymakers go forward with such a proposal that nobody is happy with, and that even you, Paul Tang, call ugly? And
Zero is also ugly sometimes.
no, but all of that to say that how policymakers can go forward with something that's not good enough and that actually go against the principles that we agreed on, that we should tax profit, not revenue.
Okay, thank you. Maybe a last question before I render the... No? Okay, so I don't know, let's begin maybe with Mr. Tang. You had a personal question.
Yeah, but also on the remark, because I think
Of
we
course.
see an important change also in the US. Of course, much of the attraction goes to the headline rate that is lower to 20%. But you see a change in the US approach to corporate taxation. Also, for example, distrusting the intra-group deliveries by the beat. So there you see a change, and this is where the US and the EU should start working together to establish new principles for corporate taxation. And there are some positive elements in the US approach, because they also distrust, in fact, the transfer price method that is now the standard. Bringing me to. But I think that Europe should take the lead in this international cooperation. If we want to pull off international cooperation, we're looking for a European initiative. That's very helpful. Otherwise, we get stuck within this every country waiting for each other. So it's very helpful. And in the European initiative, I think the CCTB is the approach. Also to include taxation of the digital economy, because what the Commission has proposed is, in fact, what they said, the Commission said two things. We need to look at the Parliament proposal for including the digital permanent establishment. So they in fact referred back to our proposal. But we need also to define the digital permanent establishment in the national corporate tax system, so we don't have 27 or 28 different corporate tax systems, because there's still a threshold in the original proposal of the Commission, of course. So you need also to define, to have the same definition above the threshold, like in the CCTB, but also below the threshold. And I think that approach was consistent. Like I said, it's still work in progress. How to deal with data, for example, in apportionment. Apportionment hasn't been really in discussion up to now, right? Not in 2011, not up to now. We still have questions. What does it imply for Finland? Good question. What does it imply for the Finnish? Good question. So that discussion has to get started. But I think the approach in itself is consistent and promising.
Thank you. Mr. van der Heden, maybe on the question on the better
regulation. If you would invite a couple of economists from another planet and ask them to design an infrastructure for tax here, then no way you would see something like a corporate income tax. So in all honesty, if you look at the way how corporate income tax has been developing and was developed, if we would have an opportunity to do it all over again and could just pull out a plug, you would see something completely different. I think that even the most talented corporate tax professors, at least that I know, would say that there are far more efficient ways, but that is politically just not possible to pull the plug. But I see your point.
Thank you. Maybe Mrs. Pallez, you want to react?
Just a small remark about this question about what is ugly and not. Well, certainly I was thinking the digital is not lovely, and we say it's not lovely, it's not perfect ideal. And again, I think we all can say why it's not perfect and lovely, so it's not an aim as such. But what I think is the more ugly is what we see around us today. You know, the complexity that has been described, the fact that Europe is in competition with itself. I mean, the member countries are competing with itself. So this is, I think, much more ugly than any of the proposal we've been talking about. That's all.
Okay, thank you. Maybe we have the time for one last question or intervention. Yes, Mr. Nicodem.
Sorry.
Troisièmement. Merci.
Just a reflection on the Digitax, because the Commission there has proposed something that may be seen as ugly, but I think it was the most beautiful that could be designed, given all the restrictions and given all the constraints that we had. And I think that it's also the conclusion of what the OECD interim report has been saying on the way to design such interim taxes. But obviously, the comprehensive solution should be the one we should aim at ultimately. And again, this solution there probably is better than 28 single digital tax that each member state would implement in case we don't have something that is on the table.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Nicodem. Yeah, of course.
Coming back on the SME, why do we pursue an option that is, let's say, the least ugly? It's ugly, but it's not as ugly as all the others. That has to do, of course, also, and you refer to better regulation, but better regulation is just, we're not in life for better regulation, we're here to also to correct social injustice sometimes. And what you see, of course, is that the member states have been very much failing in this. We have seen attempts in France to tax Google, and that was rejected by the court. And we could have, also would be very ugly, even more ugly, if we had 27 member states driving 27 different approaches. Oh, that would have also been one of the ugly ones.
Thank you so much. Let me thank you. Oh, okay, just the last word, Ms. Volanen, and then.
Yeah, totally agree. It would have been a lot uglier. And just to set the record straight, I'm really happy that you see that the global level solution. And like you have said at all times, that a global solution would be the best one. And I guess this is like really good start for conversation and making a more pretty solution for this. But yeah, so yes, let's go for pretty tax. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So let's conclude at this, I'd say, overall agreement. I thank you so much for your presence, for your contribution to our debate. Congrats. Thank you so much.